It started as just another evening, a group of friends walking home, laughing and chatting. But then they heard it, a soft, heartbreaking cry coming from under a bridge. At first, they thought it was just their imagination, but as they got closer, the cries grew louder, more desperate. What they found beneath that bridge changed their lives forever. This is a story about love, loss, and the unbreakable bond between a dog and its owner. A story that will leave you with chills, maybe even tears. These friends had no idea that their simple walk would turn into something life-changing. But when they looked under the bridge, their hearts shattered. Stay with us as we uncover the emotional rescue that will restore your faith in love and second chances. It was one of those evenings that felt peaceful, the kind where everything seemed to slow down just before nightfall. The sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the horizon in hues of deep orange and soft purple. The city lights flickered on, casting a dim glow over the empty sidewalks. The group of friends, Mia, Jake, and Oliver, walked side by side, their voices echoing through the quiet streets. It had been a long day, and they were ready to head home, talking about everything and nothing at all. Then, out of nowhere, it happened. A sound, a faint, almost ghostly whimper. Mia stopped mid-step, her breath catching in her throat. "Wait," she said, holding up a hand. "Did you hear that?" Jake frowned. "Hear what?" Oliver shrugged, shoving his hands into his pockets. "I didn't hear anything, but Mia did." And now that she was paying attention, she heard it again, a soft, sorrowful cry, like something or someone was in pain. It was so quiet, so distant, that it could have easily been mistaken for the wind. But this wasn't the wind. It was something alive, something suffering. Her stomach tightened. "It's coming from over there," she whispered, pointing toward the bridge just ahead. The bridge stretched over a narrow creek, one of those old structures with faded concrete and rusted railings. During the day, it was nothing more than a shortcut for pedestrians. But at night, it became a place people avoided. Shadows lurked beneath it, stretching out like dark fingers across the ground. Jake exchanged a look with Oliver. "Are you sure? It could just be." Then they heard it too. The sound was unmistakable now. A deep, painful whimper, followed by a soft shuffle of movement. Something was under that bridge. Something alive. And it was suffering. A chill crawled up Mia's spine. She didn't know why, but her heart started racing. Something about this felt wrong. Oliver hesitated. "Maybe it's a stray," he said, though his voice lacked confidence. "Or maybe someone's pet got lost." Mia didn't respond. Her feet were already moving, her body pulling her toward the sound. With every step, Mia's breath hitched as she stared at the trembling dog beneath the bridge. The German shepherd's ribs were faintly visible beneath his matted fur, his body thin and frail. Dirt clung to his coat, and his tail lay motionless against the cold ground. He wasn't just scared, he was defeated. Jake and Oliver stood behind her, their eyes locked on the heartbreaking sight before them. "He's in bad shape," Jake muttered. Mia swallowed hard and took a cautious step forward. She didn't want to startle him, though she doubted he had the strength to run even if he wanted to. "Hey, buddy," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. The dog's ears twitched, but he didn't lift his head. He only let out another weak whimper, his body curling in on itself, as if he expected something bad to happen. Mia's chest tightened. How long had he been here? How long had he been waiting? She crouched down, her hands trembling slightly. The air beneath the bridge was thick with the scent of damp earth and rust, the shadows stretching around them like a silent witness to whatever suffering this dog had endured. Slowly, she extended a hand. The dog flinched. It wasn't a big movement, just a tiny, involuntary shudder, like he was bracing for pain. Mia froze, her heart breaking even more. Someone had hurt him before. "It's okay," she murmured. "I won't hurt you." The dog didn't move. His eyes, dull and lifeless, flickered toward her for a brief moment before shifting away again, as if he didn't believe her. Mia took another deep breath. Then she saw it, a collar, barely visible beneath the thick, unkempt fur. It was worn and frayed, the leather cracked from time and neglect. Carefully, she reached out, brushing her fingers against it. The dog didn't react. It was as if he had given up completely. She gently turned the tag over, wiping off the grime with her thumb. The engraved letters were faded, but still readable. "Max." Her pulse quickened. She read the rest of the tag. "If found, please return to James Parker." Mia frowned, the name tugging at something in the back of her mind. James Parker. Where had she heard that name before? Jake peered over her shoulder. James Parker. He blinked. That name sounds familiar. Then it hit her. She sucked in a sharp breath, turning to look at the guys. James Parker. He passed away. A few months ago, the realization settled between them like a heavy weight. Oliver's brow furrowed. Wait, the old guy from the news. Mia nodded. Yeah, he lived alone. No family, no relatives. Her voice dropped to a whisper, and no one to take care of his dog. For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the distant hum of traffic and the occasional rustling of leaves in the wind. Max lay there, unmoving, as if waiting for something that would never come. Jake ran a hand through his hair. So what? He's been out here all this time. Just waiting. The words hit hard. Waiting. The idea was almost too painful to think about. Mia looked back at Max. She didn't know how long he had been out here. But one thing was clear. He hadn't left. He had stayed. Loyal, even in death. Mia swallowed the lump in her throat. Dogs don't understand death the way we do, she murmured. Maybe he thought James would come back for him. Maybe Max had wandered, searching. Maybe he had waited at the front door of his home until someone forced him away. Maybe, after realizing James wasn't there, he had returned to the last place they had walked together. And then, he had just stayed. Days, weeks, maybe even longer, waiting for a person who would never return. Mia's chest ached. No wonder he looked so defeated. He hadn't just lost his owner. He had lost his whole world. She felt a tear slip down her cheek before she could stop it. Max let out another quiet whimper, shifting slightly. Mia reached out again, slower this time, letting him see that she wasn't a threat. When her hand finally brushed against his fur, she could feel every rib beneath his skin. He was weak, starving. He had survived this long, but for how much longer? She turned to the guys, determination burning in her eyes. We can't leave him here. Jake nodded immediately. Yeah. No way. Oliver hesitated. I mean, what if he bites? Mia shook her head. He's too weak. And even if he wasn't, look at him. She glanced back at Max, who still hadn't moved. He doesn't even care anymore. Oliver sighed, rubbing his temples. Okay, but how do we get him out of here? He's not exactly running to us for help. Mia bit her lip. He had a point. Max wasn't moving. He had shut down completely. She reached for her backpack, pulling out a granola bar. It wasn't much, but it was something. She peeled back the wrapper, breaking off a small piece. Here, boy, she whispered, holding it out. Max's nose twitched, but he didn't lift his head. Mia gently placed the piece in front of him, waiting. A few seconds passed. Then, slowly, Max sniffed the food. His dry, cracked tongue flicked out, and he weakly licked at it before chewing. Her heart swelled. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Jake crouched beside her. We need to lift him. No way he's walking out of here. Mia nodded. We'll carry him. Together, they carefully wrapped Max in Mia's jacket, creating a makeshift sling. He barely reacted, his body limp as they gently lifted him off the ground. Mia could feel his heartbeat faint, but there, she held onto him tightly. You're safe now, buddy. Max let out a long, tired sigh, his head resting against her chest. He had waited so long, but he wasn't alone anymore. Mia's hands trembled as she cradled Max's frail body against her. The weight of him wasn't just physical. It carried years of love, loss, and unwavering loyalty. The realization sat heavy in her chest, making it hard to breathe. This wasn't just a stray dog abandoned by fate. This was a dog who had refused to move on, a dog who had waited for someone who would never return. Tears burned in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall just yet. She gently stroked Max's dirty fur, whispering, "It's okay, buddy. You don't have to wait anymore." The rest of the group stood in silence, the weight of the moment pressing down on them like an invisible force. Even Oliver, who always tried to keep things lighthearted, had nothing to say. He simply swallowed hard, his hands clenching into fists. Jake was the first to break the silence. His voice was hoarse. "We have to get him out of here." Mia nodded. "Yeah, we do." But as she looked at Max's frail form, doubt crept into her mind. Would he even make it? His breathing was slow, too slow. His body, once strong and proud, now felt fragile in her arms. His ears barely twitched at the sounds around him. His deep brown eyes, eyes that had probably once shined with joy, were now dull and lifeless. She pressed a hand to his chest, feeling the faint rhythm of his heart. It was there, weak, but still fighting. They had to move quickly. "We need to be careful," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's really weak." Jake and Oliver nodded. Without another word, they moved into action. Oliver shrugged off his jacket and spread it out on the ground. "We can use this to carry him," he said. Mia hesitated for only a second before gently laying Max down onto the jacket. He let out a small whimper, but didn't resist. He was too exhausted. Jake knelt beside them. "Okay, we'll each take a side and lift together." Mia and Oliver grabbed one end while Jake took the other. On the count of 3, they carefully lifted Max off the cold, unforgiving ground. He barely reacted. Mia's heart clenched. She could feel every fragile bone beneath his fur, each one a painful reminder of how much he had endured. Step by step, they climbed up from the shadowy depths of the bridge. The air grew warmer as they left the damp, cold space behind. But with every step, Mia's mind raced. How long had Max been down there? Had he been eating at all? Had he spent nights curled up in the darkness, hoping James would come back? The thought was unbearable. She could picture it, Max waiting near their old walking path, ears perking up at every sound, eyes scanning every face, tail wagging in desperate hope. And then, slowly, that hope fading. Mia felt her throat tighten. No dog deserved this. No loyal friend should be left to suffer alone. Jake gritted his teeth as they walked. We should take him to a vet, right now. Mia nodded. Yeah, first thing. But there was another problem. Money. Vet bills weren't cheap, and they had no idea how bad Max's condition was. He looked severely underweight, possibly dehydrated, and who knew what else? Oliver seemed to be thinking the same thing. I can cover some of the costs, he offered hesitantly. But I don't know if I have enough for everything. Mia bit her lip. She wasn't exactly in the best financial position either, and she knew Jake was struggling too. But none of that mattered right now. We'll figure it out, she said firmly. We just need to get him help first. The determination in her voice left no room for argument. As they reached the top of the bridge, a cold breeze rushed past them, ruffling Max's dirty fur. He let out a small sigh, as if the fresh air was the first comfort he had felt in a long time. Mia tightened her grip. We got you, buddy, she whispered. Max's eyes fluttered open slightly, looking up at her. For the first time, there was something there, something small, but undeniable. Trust. The sight nearly broke her. This dog had been through so much. He had lost everything. But maybe, just maybe, he was starting to believe that not everyone would leave him behind. Jake hailed a cab, while Oliver gently adjusted Max's position, making sure he was as comfortable as possible. Within minutes, they were inside, the vehicle speeding toward the nearest veterinary clinic. The driver kept glancing back at them through the rearview mirror, curiosity flickering in his eyes. What happened to him? He finally asked. Mia hesitated. How could she even explain? He lost his owner, she said simply. The driver's expression softened. He didn't ask any more questions. Max remained still throughout the ride, but every so often, his nose twitched at the new sense around him. Maybe he knew something was changing. Maybe, for the first time in a long time, he wasn't waiting alone. When they finally arrived at the clinic, Mia didn't waste a second. She rushed inside, holding Max tightly. The receptionist's eyes widened at the sight of them. We need help, Mia said breathlessly. Please. The staff acted fast. Within moments, a veterinarian and 2 assistants appeared, gently taking Max from her arms and placing him on an examination table. Mia's hands hovered in the air, reluctant to let go. But she had to. She stepped back, watching as they checked his vitals, whispered to him softly, and began their assessment. Minutes passed, then an hour. The waiting was unbearable. Finally, the vet emerged, wiping her hands on a towel. Mia jumped to her feet. Is he? He's stable, the vet reassured her. But he's severely malnourished and dehydrated. He has some minor infections and muscle atrophy from being in one place for too long. It's a miracle he lasted this long. Mia let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. Jake exhaled in relief. Oliver rubbed a hand down his face. The vet smiled gently. But he's a fighter. With proper care, he has a good chance of recovering. A lump formed in Mia's throat. He had waited all this time. And now, finally, his fight wasn't for nothing. The vet continued. He's going to need medical care, good nutrition, and a lot of love. She looked at them curiously. Are you planning to keep him? Mia's breath hitched. She glanced at Jake and Oliver. They didn't need words. The answer was clear. Mia turned back to the vet and nodded. Yes, she said, voice strong and unwavering. We're taking him home. Max wasn't waiting anymore. He had finally found his way back to love. Max's journey didn't end under that bridge. That night, as Mia carried him into her apartment, the weight of everything he had been through clung to her like a shadow. The dim light of her living room cast long shapes across the floor, but all she could focus on was the frail, exhausted dog in her arms. She set him down gently on a thick, folded blanket near the couch. Max barely moved, his body sinking into the soft fabric. His ribs were too visible, his fur dull and brittle. His eyes, though half closed from exhaustion, still held a lingering sadness. Mia sat beside him, running her fingers lightly through his fur. "You're safe now," she whispered. "You don't have to wait anymore." Max let out a slow breath, his body finally relaxing just a little. For the first time in what must have been weeks, maybe months, he had warmth, comfort, and the quiet presence of someone who cared. But this was only the beginning. Mia barely slept. Every few hours, she woke up to check on Max, making sure he was still breathing, still warm, still there. At one point, in the deep silence of the night, she heard a soft sound, barely audible, a whimper. She turned her head and saw him, shifting in his sleep, his legs twitching slightly. A dream. Was he dreaming of James? Of the cold nights under the bridge? Of the lonely hours spent waiting? Her chest tightened. Slowly, she reached out and placed a hand on his back. His trembling stopped. His breathing evened out. Mia stayed like that for a long time, letting him know, without words, that he was no longer alone. The next morning, Mia prepared a small bowl of boiled chicken and rice, something gentle for his weak stomach. At first, Max only sniffed at it, hesitant. Then, as if realizing it was real, that he wasn't dreaming, he took a cautious bite, and then another, and another. By the time he finished, he looked up at Mia, his brown eyes holding something new. Not quite trust yet, not quite understanding, but something close to hope. She smiled. "Good boy." The first week was rough. Max was still weak. He slept most of the time, curled up in the same spot on the blanket Mia had given him. When he moved, it was slow, deliberate, like every step required effort. She took him to the vet again for checkups, making sure he was getting the care he needed. They gave him supplements, antibiotics, and a schedule for slow, careful feeding to help him regain his strength. But the hardest part wasn't the physical healing, it was the emotional one. Max didn't wag his tail. He didn't get excited when Mia came home. He didn't lean into her touch or seek out affection. He was there, but at the same time, it felt like he wasn't. It was like part of him was still back under that bridge, still waiting, still hoping James would come. One evening, about 2 weeks after she had brought him home, Mia was sitting on the floor beside Max, reading a book. The soft hum of music played from her speaker, filling the quiet apartment with warmth. She had gotten used to his silence, but then something happened. Out of nowhere, Max shifted closer to her. Not much, just an inch, maybe two, but it was enough. Mia froze, barely breathing. Then, ever so slowly, he rested his head against her leg. Her heart clenched. It was the first time he had voluntarily sought comfort, the first time he had chosen closeness over distance. She didn't move, didn't speak. She just let him stay there, feeling the warmth of his body against hers. It was a small moment, but it meant everything. Another few days passed. Max had started eating more regularly. His fur, though still dull, looked a little healthier. He was gaining strength, but he was still quiet. Then, one morning, something changed. Mia had just walked into the room, coffee cup in hand, when she saw it. A single, hesitant wag of Max's tail. It was so quick, so subtle, that she almost thought she had imagined it. But then it happened again. A slow, uncertain movement, as if he wasn't sure if he was allowed to feel happy. Mia set down her cup, crouched beside him, and smiled. "You're getting there, buddy." Max blinked at her, and then another wag, stronger this time. She let out a small laugh, warmth spreading through her chest. It had taken weeks, but finally, Max was starting to come back to life. Little by little, Max changed. He started following Mia around the apartment, watching her with quiet curiosity. He still wasn't the type to jump around excitedly or demand attention, but he was present. One day, she caught him sitting by the window, watching the world outside. When she came up beside him, he glanced at her, then, surprisingly, leaned his head against her side. Mia swallowed back tears. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about trust, about love, about finding a way to move forward. By the time a month had passed, Max was a different dog. His body had filled out, his coat was shinier, and his steps were stronger. He no longer hesitated when Mia reached out to pet him. And one evening, when she came home after a long day, something happened that made her heart stop. The moment she walked through the door, Max's ears perked up, his tail wagged, without hesitation this time. And then, for the first time since she had found him, he walked up to her and licked her hand. Mia sank to her knees, wrapping her arms around him. He didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. Instead, he pressed into her embrace. And at that moment she knew he was finally home. Max never forgot James. Even after all the healing, all the progress, there were still moments when he would sit by the door, staring outside as if waiting for someone. And maybe, in a way, he always would. But the difference now was he had a new family, a new home, and a love that James would have wanted for him. Because love, real love, never truly disappears. It just finds a new way to exist. And sometimes, it finds its way back to us. If this story touched your heart, make sure to subscribe for more incredible rescue stories.